they solve also a bunch of niche use cases that we might not have the time to or resources to build ourselves. So enables us to keep things really, really simple, and yet have cover for all of these different niche use cases. So having a developer community is a super, super powerful thing, right? And to that point, an API is a great way to sort of bring conceptual clarity to what you do, because if you keep your API very simple, or when you're actually designing your company or your business model, you can look at your API and it brings this sort of very stringent, strict sort of it's like an exposure of what you do, right? So you can look at your domain logic, your domain objects, and if you see that it's simple and that it's easy, then you're on the right track. And API is a great way to do that, right? There are a bunch of links here, by the way, under the slides, and I'm gonna share my presentation probably on SlideShare or so afterwards, so you can dig in further. So anyway, now we arrive at sort of the gist of the talk. So we built this platform from 0 to millions of users and to hundreds or thousands of apps, and we've learned a lot of stuff along the way, and I thought maybe for you guys it could be helpful if I just share a couple of points, a couple of things that we sort of learned along the way. So wanted to start off just with the first thing. So keep it simple, stupid. That's sort of the first rule that we use. And I think even with technical people, developers, they're people too, right? And so if you manage to simplify things, cut the amount of steps necessary to integrate all of those things, it's really, really important. So, I mean, one thing, for example, at the start, right, we had this very sort of techie terminology, and we were very sort of, I don't know, technical about how we talked about our API, and we sort of, as we moved that language to a very sort of a different level, a simpler language, we saw, that in itself helps a lot. So keeping things simpler, absolutely key. So just to highlight that again, one thing we really talk about a lot internally is sort of time to integration. So how can we cut the time to integrate? And just a few milestones over the years. I mean, it's nothing special, but just quickly to highlight, like, in the early days, we just sort of put our API out there. No documentation, or like very bad documentation, very sort of technical language around it. And that, in that time we had people building stuff, right? But it took like a week to do that. And then eventually we figured out that, there are all these people creating like API wrappers, which, from the start we thought like, yeah, people are gonna build these libraries, and they're just gonna, hackers are just gonna go and do that for us, and create an ecosystem. But what we realized was, and I think a lot of companies realized that as well, I mean, it wasn't clear at the time, like, 4 years ago, which direction it was going to go, because some companies, they were building their own wrappers, they had a very sort of controlled environment. Some companies let sort of the community do that, and we were like, yeah, we're startups, so we're going to let the community do it, no problem. But what ends up happening is you have random hackers building, wrappers, right? So you could have this somebody, like a lone programmer, building like a PHP wrapper somewhere. And then you have the sort of a third guy coming in and building something on top of that API wrapper that this other one person built and then abandoned, right? So you have this sort of unfortunate situation where somebody builds on top of somebody else's kind of quick hack, which then, and you have that for each and every programming language. So what ends up happening is you have this very complex situation and complex relationship. So just as a kind of learning point from that, build your own API wrappers. Like pick the languages that you think are core, and do them yourself, because otherwise you're going to have this sort of chaotic situation. It's just not worth it. So when we figured that one out, we sort of cut the development time almost in half. So that's one thing. Other thing is, of course, great documentation, right? So anything you can do in the documentation to make things simpler, lots of examples, running code in the sort of directly in the documentation, anything like that helps a great deal. And now where we are today, we kind of launched something even more than that. So we provide like the user interface. We provide sort of for the core sort of scalable use cases we have around our API, we provide a lot of stuff. So basically, it's like a drag and drop integration in the meantime. So that's how you can sort of cut the time to integration. So on that note as well, we're thinking a lot about scalability, right? So, you know, in the beginning, we were talking, you know, left and right, or like randomly with all of these like smaller and bigger companies. And some of the big companies, they were like, yeah, you know, sure, we can integrate, but then you're going to have to build like X, Y, and Z for us. And you're going to have to integrate in a very special way and extend your API only for us and stuff like that. And that's a really, really dangerous path to sort of go down. So we've been doing a lot to try and avoid that and sort of focus on the you know, 2, 3, 4 really, really scalable things you can do with the API and try to sort of extrapolate from the individual cases and sort of learn from that. So we used to have 0 people working with the API, right? So it was sort of everybody's business to reach out and to talk to everybody they knew about our great API. And that worked for a while, but you know, as we sort of started to think in a more scalable way, as we actually ended up hiring this guy, absolutely great, very scalable guy. He doesn't have this ugly haircut usually. He's just excited for being in San Francisco, I think. So this was sort of his first day, I think, or one of the early days in San Francisco. So we have our platform team based there now, and in the meantime, we have sort of 3.5 people working with our platform. But these 3.5 people, they manage thousands of relationships, right? So we have to think about it in a scalable way, otherwise it will break down. So on that note, it really helps to set a few goals and to sort of try and understand what are the scalable things that you do with your API. What are the key things that you're trying to achieve? Because if you have those, then you can measure it, because I mean that's the great thing about computers. Everything is measurable, right? So we have all of this very, very granular data. We can look at it, we can set goals, very precise goals, and we can work towards them. So in our case, you know, we have a bunch of metrics that we watch, but I think that the 2 key ones are, in our case, it's the percentage amount of people who have connected at least one application, so from our user base, and the other one is the percentage of sounds shared over the API, right? So we try to increase those both numbers, and we set some goals and we work towards them. So another thing that I think, I mean, I touched on this already, but I think that we've actually done a really good job with that at SoundCloud, is to bring a sort of personality to the product and to bring a language to it and to sort of speak SoundCloud, right? So we have this one guy now who is, you know, 50% of his work is just speaking SoundCloud and teaching everybody else at SoundCloud how to actually speak with the voice of SoundCloud, right? So there was this great blog post on AVC, on Fred Wilson's blog not too long ago by, I think, Giant Robot Dinosaur, which has this funny key statement. Most important step for build product is build product. But second most important is build personality for product. So it's basically, you know, you can't really turn it around because you have to have a product to be able to talk about it. But talking about the product in a consistent way, giving a personality to it, I think is super, super key, right? So, and that goes for developers as well. So just when we speak to our developers, we speak to them as users of the platform, and we try to have that same consistent language. We try to make, you know, as many individual bonds with developers as we can, because these people are multipliers. They're really, really important. So we try to speak with them. You know, basic thing, I already touched on it, write kick-ass documentation. It's like very, very, very important. And we've rewritten our documentation a couple of different times already, and it helps so much to have it in shape. Another thing, you know, kind of, how do I say, quick and dirty tip for developers. I mean, developers are early adopters, right? They're nerds. So, you know, speaking their language is super important. So, for example, I mean, don't be ashamed of yourselves adopting the latest, you know, coolest technology, even if there is, you know, cargo culting, even if there is a sort of hipster factor, like a DevOps Borat here saying Scala is Java for hipster, which I very much agree with. But I think that it's, you know, if we had the wrapper for Scala, that would probably help us a lot. So basically catch on to the next, to the sort of the technology trends out there and make use of that. So another thing we tried and failed a couple of times is paying people to do stuff, right? So I remember this one thing we took one guy who started an open source wrapper for us, and then we said, we're going to pay you to finish it, right? The problem is that shifts the whole sort of mindset into now he's getting paid to do stuff for us, as opposed to I'm doing it out of my passion. Like I'm doing it because I love SoundCloud and I want to extend their product, right? So all of a sudden putting money in the mix might not be the most productive thing you can do. So we've actually learned to sort of avoid that in the meantime. And we don't, for example, have cash prices on our website, right? We try to get people to do stuff without actually paying them in money. We pay them in other ways. So, and eat your own dog food. I mean, I already touched on it, but the fact is, we're from the very start, we built hacks on the weekends. We were using our own API from the very, very early days. Like we had an API before we went even public beta. So we used our API from the early start. And in the meantime, like all of our sort of flagship stuff is based on the API. Don't change. Well, this is just sort of a thing that it's a mistake that we did. Basically, we failed to version our API. So from very early on, we were like, versioning, we don't need that. So we're just going to put everything in one namespace and just kind of keep changing things. And that's actually come back and sort of bitten us in the ass a couple of times, because we've been wanting to change things and been unable to, because we haven't had the sort of the versioning of the API in place. So we're working now on a version 2 of the API, but it's sort of been delayed and there's been issues with it because of that. So I would advise you to put your API in a namespace like api.yourservice.com/v1 so you can actually then talk about v2 and then change a bunch of things, because you're gonna need to eventually change things. And engage the community. I mean, I think again, this is actually one of the things that I'm proud of, that we've been able to do that in a great way, right? So we had our API, we had a bunch of few hacks happening at the very start, but I think it's only when we started to do these sort of music hack days together with a bunch of other companies that we really started to see traction on our API. So in the meantime, these are events where we have 8 of them a year or something like that. So it's Barcelona, London, New York, and all kinds of nice places, San Francisco. And we have sort of 250, 300 people coming together and hacking. And the last one that I remember now from New York, we had 80 hacks come out of one 24-hour session, and we got we got an article in Billboard magazine and stuff like that, about us hacking the music industry. So I think it's a great PR vehicle, it's a great marketing vehicle, but it's also just great for the community, and it's fun for our people too. I can pick out a bunch of SoundCloud employees in this image as well. So I mean, we have great fun doing it, sending people around the planet hacking. So yeah. And this is just sort of a quick note about BizDev. So you can read about it on the web as well. It's originally Katarina who turned this coin of BizDev 2.0, which is just that instead of sort of making a handshake deal with 2 suits, you have computers talk to each other first, and you have the hacker grassroots level happening first. And then if you see that there is something, some value exchange actually going on, something interesting happening, then you can go in with the suits and sort of do that part. So, and then we had Chris Dixon as well. He sort of extended that into some mashup of the 2 ideas. So basically BizDev 1.5, and I think that's what we're doing, where basically we have the high-profile deals that we're doing with BizDev people, but we also have huge ecosystem of grassroots stuff happening. And some of the grassroots stuff turns out to be the most valuable, right? So it's both. And I mean, again, I'm just saying from experience, do fail. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. I know that the next thing we do is going to fail in some interesting sort of way, right? So then it's about iterating, and then failing again, and iterating, failing, iterating, and I mean, it's almost repetitive now, but it's really, really fun to see how is this going to fail? How are we going to iterate to take it to the next level, right? And that's basically what I'm ending with. So, thanks.
Thanks, Eric. If you have questions, please raise your hand. We have one here in the front row. Let's see which one goes quicker.
Thank you very much for the insights. Now I have it might happen to be a longer question, so I'm going to make it shorter. How much open is enough and how much applications are enough? For example, I'm asking this with relation to Twitter, who was open in the beginning, then raised a lot of capital, became huge, and it killed a lot of the applications that made it grow. So what I see with you, are you afraid of getting there the same, like actually turning the developers against you? I mean, the developers that helped you grow, and also what is the effect that you have on your servers by so many different applications that are sucking information from you, and people are actually accessing all your data and information, but not even knowing that you are behind. So you actually end up paying for some other services to grow.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, I think, yeah, it's a really, really good note. So I think our API sort of terms of services, they are changing. So like, it's not like there's this sort of ever like, well, it's not set in stone, right? So we are moving, we're developing as a platform. So and you know, given the size we're at now, we obviously we have to think a bit, you know, more clearly about those different risks and the sort of pros and cons of different types of integrations. So you know, we are sort of moderating use of our platform. But I think ultimately sort of everybody wins anyway, right? So I think it's been a great ride for us, like up to this point now. And I think that we've done some great partnerships and some people that actually built sort of their business on top of our API. And there's no way that that's going to sort of go away, you know, anytime soon. So, and I think to your point about the data or like the stress that it puts on our servers and stuff like that, I think so our business model is freemium. It's very simple, very straightforward. You know, you can use the service for free up to a certain limit, and then you pay for it, right? So we see, I mean, a lot of our people who come in over the API, they convert and become paying users as well. So it's kind of an acquisition channel for us, really. So we don't see a huge problem with that yet.
Question? One question here, front row.
My name is Sandra, and I'm a digital communications manager, so my question is going to be a little less technical. But I was wondering, since the entire digital revolution in the music industry, what impact does your API have overall on the music industry? And if you have worked together with major labels trying to help them achieve more traction in this area and try to make them understand how important it is that they facilitate access to music and actually help users add creative layers on top of that. Thank you.
Right. I mean, it's really exciting to see that this change is actually going on in a very real way. So like when we started out, if you mentioned API to a major label, they were like, what? But now, like just the other week, like EMI opened up their catalog through an API, right? So I think this is the way things are shifting, like in general in the industry, and we're talking to all of the major labels, like we're doing cool stuff with them on a weekly basis, basically. So I think they're very much like on board with the idea of opening up their data. So it's a slow but sort of interesting shift, and it's actually accelerated like in the last sort of 1-2 years. So I think it's super exciting. I have a very positive outlook on the future of the industry, and I think some key people in the industry have too, so it's really cool.